Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Centre for Legal Innovation's ReinventED Legal Business, the Case Studies series. Absolutely delighted today to spend time with Vitality Law Australia, and in particular two fabulous people from Vitality Law Australia, Sarah Stoddart, who's the founder and director of VLA, and Michelle Davis, who's special counsel with VLA as well. Great to have you, Sarah and Michelle. Really, really great to see you.
Good to be here, Terry. Thank you.
Most welcome. So, folks, again, welcome. There's Vitality Law Australia is such an amazing story. I'm just so glad that we have the opportunity to share that with everyone today. And Sarah, I wanted to kick off with the first question today, if I may, to you, and to kind of start in terms of discovering your firm in the way that many of us do, which is by going to your website. And I did that. And when I landed on your website, I saw this sentence that really jumped out and resonated with me, which was, we're a non-traditional law firm specialising in healthcare, small business, property matters, wills and estates. And I wanted to focus on the first part of that, the non-traditional law firm bit, and ask you, what does that mean to you, and why is it so important for you to have that, really upfront in terms of your website?
Yeah, sure. So the non-traditional law firm, I think what that means to me is basically we are not what bigger firms are. And I think that that's created a bit of a reputation problem, quite frankly, for the industry in terms of how lawyers engage with their clients, where their offices are located, that they need you to come in and sit in, the meeting room and be all formal. It's very daunting for clients who don't work with lawyers regularly to have that experience and to do that. And of course, just how you access lawyers. I think there's a bit of a divide generally from the traditional lawyer and the client. And I didn't like that. I came from a top tier background, and whilst I really enjoyed my time at that firm, there was that sort of divide, and that's not the clients that I work with, and that's not the experience that I wanted them to have. So it was important to me to put that up front and center so that the clients knew that what they were engaging with wasn't like that. And I do hope that we show them that when they start to engage with us. But I think having that front and center also then leads into the other information you'll see on our website about who we are. We all work remotely. We don't work Fridays, things like this. So if I hadn't have said we're non-traditional, it might have then come as a bit of a shock, or perhaps a bit odd, that we have these other special features that aren't in the traditional law firm setting. So it was important for me to people to know upfront who they were engaging with, and their experience wasn't going to be traditional in the sense of, the old sort of style of law.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that also in that part, in that conversation, and that, pulling out what your business values and goals were or are is really important as well. How is that why is that important, and how has that impacted the sort of law firm that you are, and I guess particularly your culture at VLA?
So I think there's two parts of that question. There's the values and the goals as we articulate within our team and how I've set up the culture. And then also there's the values and goals as we articulate to our clients. So starting with clients, if I can, the values there, obviously the main clients that we are dealing with are healthcare business owners. So they are running very different businesses to ours and working very long hours, particularly over the last few years when we have are focused on a major health pandemic. So the values and goals that I wanted them to realise was that you can engage with us in whatever way suits you and at whatever time suits you for your business. So it was important for me to articulate that so that they were comfortable knowing that, however you choose to communicate is fine with us. And also, I think it was important to communicate that we do have other interests outside of the law firm. Now, there was two reasons for that. One was to set up some boundaries so that clients know we've got other things outside of law, so please sort of respect that. But also to relate to them, because our clients too have children or outside interests. And if we are on a meeting and a child appears, that's perfectly fine. They don't need to be worried about that. We totally get it. And then that flows through to the culture of the firm and the team. Now, we're a small team. There's only 5 of us. It's grown very rapidly this year, I have to say. But the team culture is the same thing. So I like the team to be open and upfront with what's going on in their lives. Obviously, I'm not asking for personal stuff, but
Sure.
you know, if there's a child that needs to be picked up from daycare, that's absolutely fine. Go and do that. Or if you need to go to an appointment, go and do that. So I like to really have that work-life integration so that we don't have to be 2 different people. The person that turns up to the law firm and has to, you know, have everything in order. Meanwhile, there's things going on in our personal lives. If there's things going on, that's fine. Let's just deal with that and work it out as we go along. So the values of that open transparency, that we have other things going on, having boundaries in place are really important to me for both the client and team perspective.
I've got to ask you a follow-up question on that, because I'm sure that these things are front and center, and I want to bring you in here, Michelle, on this point in just a second as well, when you're interviewing for people that join the team. But is it kind of surprising to them that what you're saying around the sort of things that you said is real? Because there's a lot of folks that talk the talk, but when you actually experience the firm as an employee or you know, as a client, and we'll get to the client bit in a second, it's like, wow, this really happens here. Do you find that there is a little bit of that?
Yeah, definitely. So a few people that I interviewed for our most recent role, so our lawyer role, you could tell on those first initial calls, they were, you know, walking the line of the traditional law firm interview. And then when they were talking to me, like, hang on, she's mentioned children, she's mentioned no Fridays, and they're kind of a bit confused by it.
Yeah.
And actually, the lawyer that I ultimately hired for that role wasn't looking for a new role.
Wow.
She was quite happy where she was, but she saw my ad, for want of a better word, on LinkedIn, which didn't talk about PAE, didn't talk about drafting and communication skills, because to me, if you're a lawyer, you have those skills or they can be developed and taught. It was the human elements that really came through in that ad. And she said that resonated with her, and that was where she wanted to be. So, yeah, definitely it does. You do come up across some confused faces for a little bit, but then people really relax and are appreciative of that.
Yeah, yeah. So, Michelle, I want to bring you in here. I know we're going to talk in a little bit more detail about how your role kind of fits within the firm generally, but just on that piece, when you joined the firm, I mean, obviously this was an important part of your decision to join, but was it kind of like, wow, this is really happening?
Yeah, I think it does take you aback initially to find that someone actually believes and fulfills that, not just says it, but actually does offer it and enforce that mentality.
Yeah.
But yes, you're quite right. It was a very big reason for joining BLA. I have 2 kids of my own, you know, and I have a life outside of my career. My career has many facets, if you will. So that's and they're important to me as a person, as a professional, and having the ability to be the practitioner, but also not have to give up those other things that make me who I am, was a really important part of my decision to move to BLA.
And makes you a great practitioner as well, right? In the work that you do. Yeah.
And it keeps you connected to the world around you. You know, you can't do anything in a silo or a vacuum, any of those sort of phrases that apply here. It really does. You are a human being, and a human being is made up of multiple facets of life and surroundings. So the idea of being this one person at work and another person outside, it is really confusing and can be disheartening and a bit soul destroying at the same time. So the idea of being able to blend those 2 things and not be afraid to be a person at the same time as being a practitioner, I think is what a sustainable career needs.
And increasingly probably what clients are looking for as well. You know, like having that, you bringing your whole person to work, but being able to be that same person with them. Yeah.
I think so. And I think especially in my practice area of wills and estates, there's a very, very human element at the core
Definitely.
of what I do. And so showing a person that you are very much a human, and sometimes trying to dispel myths and concepts, and ideas of what a lawyer is like, or, what they do and how they do it and all those sorts of things. I think it's an important part for clients to see is the human element, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. It throws me to the next area I'd like to explore, Sarah, if I may, with you, about clients. And again, when I was doing my homework, when I was doing my research, the thing that really again struck me was this focus on what you can and what you can't assist people with. So it's really, 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 really clear, but also a really deep understanding of the client's business as being critical to the work that you do, and also understanding the context in which they operate. So to me, it was almost like, yes, you're going to be giving legal advice, but there's a more holistic element to that as well that you're bringing to it. And I'm just, we hear a lot about the words client experience. And so I wanted to ask you, how do those words play into how you approach clients and those sort of elements that I mentioned? Is that client experience, or is it something more or something less in your thoughts?
That's an interesting question. And I think client experience ultimately is something that is determined by the client.
Absolutely.
But I think all we can do is set it up so that they have the best experience. And I have spent a lot of time thinking about, if I was approaching a lawyer, what would I want? What do I need to know? How do I want to consume information? So as I mentioned, our clients predominantly are healthcare business owners and very busy people. They are not prepared for the long documentation that law firms send out. I know that. And to me, whilst I could have continued to do that and said, well, this is how lawyers do law, that wasn't going to give them the best experience or the best understanding of the actual advice that we offer. So whilst we do that, obviously from a risk perspective, we're still doing that sort of thing. We accompany that with other things like slide decks, which summarize key dates or next steps that they need to action, when they can next expect to hear from us. Fabulous infographics that Michelle has designed to show them the process. So we're already answering the question before it arises for them, which saves them both time and ultimately money, because they're getting the answers up front. They feel well informed, and they trust, obviously, that we know what we're doing. So I think client experience is all of that, and it's those touch points that the client has with the firm, in addition to accessibility. So as I mentioned, if they want to send a website inquiry in the middle of the night, that's absolutely fine. You can book with Michelle online. You can call us. You can email. So having it really accessible, rather than, no, you'll ring reception during 8 to 4 and that's the only way you'll get someone. All of the team are directly accessible as well. We don't have a one number that you call and be transferred through to. And I think clients really appreciate that as well. So client experience is obviously different for every client, but my approach to it was, well, what would I want to know if I was a time poor business owner that didn't work in this space every day? And touching on your points about us understanding the whole of the business, that's also really important, because a client comes to us with a query, and there's often more to it than what they're actually saying, particularly in the healthcare space, which is heavily regulated and has very complex ownership structures. So what they're saying isn't necessarily what is actually the case. And that's not because they're trying to pull the wool over your eyes. It's because they don't actually know the question they're trying to get the answer to. So we do make a very conscious effort to understand the whole of their business. And the other reason we do that is because we tend to find that once a client engages with the firm, we are then part of their business journey. So it's not just that one job that we're doing, it's then taking them on the journey through their business, even to the point where a pharmacist client who might have just purchased a pharmacy or relocated or whatever it might be, then engages with Michelle because suddenly they've got a very significant asset that they need to protect. So there is crossover even with those practice areas. We don't operate in silos at all.
Yeah. It's also kind of busting the myth, isn't it? Because the myth has been, if you work in the way that your firm works, particularly remotely, flexibly, you know, however, whatever the word or the particular combination is, hybrid, that it seems to be equated somehow with being less accessible to clients if you work in that way. And so how did you, I'm sure that you must have encountered some of those discussions. Take us through how you kind of explained that, or how you worked through those discussions from a business owner's perspective.
Yeah, it is a little bit of a tricky one. Our healthcare clients are spread out across Australia, which I actually think is fortunate, because a Sydney or Melbourne or even WA client knows that they're not going to have a face-to-face meeting with me. So that was easy to address. And the fact that obviously Zoom had a massive uptake during the pandemic, so the ability to do that really easily and simply was something that was appreciated. For the more local clients, and particularly the ones that I had acted for previously, it did take a little bit of education, and there was only one or two that was completely perplexed by the thought of, hang on, you're working from home. Like, does that mean you're on the kitchen table and there's, you know, cleaners around or children around or whatever it is? And I think it was just about saying, well, yes, that's how I'm set up, and being very upfront and confident in the response to that, but also continuing to deliver the service that has always been delivered. So it doesn't really matter where I am or really what hour of the day I'm working, so long as I'm getting the outcomes for you. So there was only a few people that were kind of a bit confused by it. Everyone else has been not bothered by it at all. The only other kind of issue that I have from time to time is clients who want to drop documents in. Sure. And obviously I'm at home, so that can be an interesting one to navigate. And look, I just offer to collect it from them, or to meet them for a coffee, or work around it that way. And then they think, oh, that's nice, she's happy to come to my business or to take the time out to have a coffee, and they kind of feel special, even though I'm actually just not wanting to tell them where I live.
Yes, exactly. You know, you mentioned a really important word there, and that's the word outcome. And I've got to pick that one up, because it's such a burning issue, or continues to be a burning issue now, which is, you know, the billable hour versus a focus on outcomes. Again, as you were setting up, and now obviously very established with VLA, what was your take on that, the billable hour versus outcomes, and what was your process of working that through, and where did you arrive at, I guess, in terms of that?
So that is an interesting one, and actually something that Michelle and I were only discussing yesterday. So we have a hybrid model, essentially. So there is some work that is strictly that fixed fee or value pricing, if you want to call it that, and other work that is hourly, simply because there are too many variables beyond our control that we just don't know which way it's going to go. However, for every client, we do give a fee estimate, or a range, which is a fairly tight range, to set that expectation, rather than just saying this is an hourly rate and they're left scratching their head wondering, well, how many hours is it actually going to take? And we also, we bill quite regularly, so that there's no bill shock at the end. Clients know what they're getting along the way, and also can budget accordingly. So it was a difficult decision. I had in my head that I would go full fixed fee value pricing, but it's a little bit too difficult in the commercial space when you're dealing with landlords and other third parties that really have no control over. Same with regulators.
Yeah, absolutely. Michelle, I want to bring you in there and your thoughts as well about the kind of, I guess, almost the billable hour outcomes debate. It seems to be still the right word to characterize this. What are your thoughts on that in addition to Sarah's?
Look, I think I very much echo Sarah's comments in this regard. Before I joined VLA, I ran my own firm, and I was effectively fixed fee for the most of it, purely because it was a little easier to do that. There was some things that were a bit challenging, but nonetheless, wills and estate planning tended to be a little bit more in that fixed fee opportunity area. And so having said that, there are other practice areas that are sort of outside of that general wills and estate planning aspect that aren't always that simple and in a fixed environment. So it is a tough one, and it certainly depends on the kinds of clients that you have. And a lot of my work in the past has been with high net worth individuals, those that have business and trust interests and the like. So the complex estate planning was very much a common denominator in all of the work that I would do. And so the ranges became more of the approach to do it, again, being a tight range. So again, as Sarah said, having a manageable expectation for the client, avoiding the bill shock. I used to charge regularly, even in my own firm, for the same reasons. So understandably, that's where a lot of Sarah and I sort of our positions in business very much aligned, which is another reason I joined VLA in the first place, because those sorts of positions and attitudes towards client engagement are really, really important and really make or break a relationship with a client in the first place. So yeah, very much that fixed value pricing speaks to us, but it's not always possible. And I think it's just one of those things that evolve at the moment, and people's buying attitudes also evolve in terms of professional services. So yeah, I think it's a watch this space kind of debate too.
Yeah, absolutely. But I also have to kind of just reflect from a business owner's point of view. The regular billing has got to help a bit with the cash flow as well, which is, makes good business sense, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, wages are fortnightly, so it frankly doesn't make sense to bill monthly.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to jump into, and Sarah, this question first to you, about the mix of services and products that you offer, because I find this combination fascinating, actually. Again, jumping onto your website, I saw that you offer a bunch of, and there's a whole lot of them, kits and templates and checklists and books, and you're doing blogs, and I was a bit exhausted as I was looking at all of that, but I thought, yay, that's amazing, fantastic. But there's also what I would call legal advice. So we've got kind of the application in a way of experience across the board, but also a packaging almost of knowledge that people can access as well. So I wanted to ask you, because I think this really is a fascinating combination of how did you come to the decision of having that mix of things available, and how do you find them? And I think you've touched on this already, but I wanted to ask this very specifically. How do you find those mixed together under the VLA banner and what you offer?
Yeah, sure. So you're quite right that there is a range of resources on there. Some are free and some are paid. So the free resources tend to be more information-based, so they're webinar recordings or checklists if you're buying or selling a home, for example, whereas the paid documents are more tailored to pharmacy businesses in particular. There's offers to purchase, there's buying kits, things that you'll need to buy a pharmacy. The reason I did that was because I was finding a very common pattern in the sort of inquiries that I was getting, if we take a pharmacy owner, for example, they're obviously out there looking for a pharmacy to buy, but they haven't bought it yet. So they don't want to engage a lawyer to do a pharmacy purchase transaction. They just want to know, what do I put in an offer to purchase document? And often they're having those thoughts and queries after hours because they're working during the day and they're trying to purchase a business perhaps without their current employer knowing, or that sort of thing. So rather than having to wait for us to be back in the office to get a response on that, or feel like they have to actually formally engage a lawyer to get that assistance, I made templates and documents like that available so that they could continue what they were doing. But of course, at the same time, if they've found that and they can see that we're offering that, the chances of them then engaging with us to actually take that transaction for them was a lot higher, because they remembered that we were there to offer that assistance when they couldn't get on top of, in touch with anyone else, or without having to go through the formal engagement process. So that was my decision to do that mix of the client services, but also the kind of products, if you'd like to call them that, as well. I also find that the industry that we work with doesn't have business skills, in the sense that that isn't something that's taught at university, yet so many of them are thrust into business ownership very, very early for various reasons. So I'm very, very passionate about educating the healthcare industry, and in particular pharmacists, on business skills. And I found that having those resources available, again, is something that they can use and access in their own time, but also usually translates to engagement later on.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, I want to kind of pull out a couple of things there, and that's firstly your process. So it seems like, and you said this at the beginning, that you put yourself in your client's shoes, almost take their journey, and then you're developing this product and service mix that really is going to work in and help them. Is that right? Is that a fair comment in terms of how you do? Yeah, okay.
Absolutely.
And then the other thing, I've just got to explore this one with you, and that's I'm going to call it another myth bust as well, which is a lot of folks seem to think that the more they put on their website, so the sort of resources that you're making available for free, the less work they will get. But it seems to me that you're saying, no, actually, I'm getting more work. So tell us a bit about that, because that's really fascinating.
Yeah, definitely. So there's a few kind of components to that, I suppose. One is empowering the client so that they can educate themselves, so that when they come to you, they have a bit more base knowledge than they would have otherwise had. And that, it makes them feel good about what they're doing. It also means they ask the right questions so that we can actually get to what they are after quicker. But also I find that it does translate because of that whole know, like, and trust.
Yes.
So these people are engaging with our firm well before we even know that they're engaging with us. And from accessing whatever material it is on the website, they are getting to know us, they're getting to like us, and ultimately and hopefully trust us. They can see the kind of work that we do. They can see the quality of our products and services and the information that we're willing to share. So it's demonstrating our expertise. And particularly with the webinar material, you're getting to engage with me without actually having to engage with me in person. So you're getting a sense of what I'm like in your own time. So absolutely, I think it does translate to a uptake of work, but also a smoother transition, because the client knows what you like and likes you before they're engaging with you. So you don't have that awkwardness of where the lawyer and the client just don't fit because they've already kind of met you.
Absolutely. I love that. I wanted to come and revisit, in a way, this question of flexible, remote and hybrid work, and just kind of, and I want to ask you this question, Michelle, as well. But first, if I may go to you, Sarah, you launched mid-pandemic in a way, which I'm sure many folks would have said to you that was very brave, but it was also at a time when, for many, many law firms in our industry, they were really embracing flexible and remote working, even hybrid work, for the very first time. And there'd be lots of folks knocking on their door for a long time asking for it. But we then kind of had almost a global proof of concept, in a way, that people couldn't ignore. And now I guess we're seeing, to some extent, the flip side of that, with some firms doing some really crazy things, like absolutely mandating that people have to be in the office, or if they want to work from home, then they have to have salary decreases. And we've seen all of this in the media, and I'm sure kind of looked at it and thought many different things about it. But as a business owner who set up their business based very much with this being a fundamental principle of how you operate, how has it worked? How has it really worked for you?
So initially, I have to admit, it was purely selfish. So when the pandemic hit, I was heavily pregnant. So I pretty much worked from home straight away for safety for the end of my pregnancy.
For sure.
And then I went off and had my son. And then when I was due to return to work, which was the time that I launched VLA in November 2020, I'd already proven to myself that I could work from home, because I think prior to that, I always wondered whether I'd get, distracted by the washing that had to be hung out or preparing the meal. And I didn't, and partly that is because my workspace has always been very separate to my living area. So I do have that divide, I suppose. So I knew that I could do it. And then when I launched VLA, I simply didn't want the overhead of office space. And this is, still 2020. So we didn't know what was going on with the pandemic, how long that would last, impacts of lockdowns, that sort of thing. So when I made the decision for launch, it was kind of a no-brainer for me to do that from home, and keeping in mind I had a 5-month-old as well, so I wanted to be nearby for him, obviously. So that, for me personally, it was a no-brainer and something that I just did from the get-go. Then when the time came to recruit team members, that's where I kind of had to revisit the decision again, particularly with the more junior staff, to ascertain, well, how am I going to support them? How am I going to, because you do get some benefit of that office space where you can turn your chair around and ask the question or go and knock on somebody's door. And I knew that that wouldn't happen. So how was I going to manage those kind of questions and things that arose throughout the day? So for me, I asked the people that I was recruiting, and said, look, this is a flexible workspace. How do you feel about that? And if you did have a question, how would you approach that with me? And ultimately, we worked out solutions like jumping on Zoom, or through our legal practice management software, there's a chat function, so it's easy to pop a question in there, or there's always email. So there were teething problems, I suppose, particularly with the first couple of team members I had who I didn't actually know personally, whereas now with the current team, obviously I had worked with Michelle previously. Our secretary I'd worked with 8 years ago, so she knew not only the work but how I worked, and we had that trust already there. And then with our lawyer, she's just fit in perfectly, like she's always been there, and it's just worked. So there's no kind of magic to it, other than, I think, being really upfront and actually, rather than assuming how people want to engage and ask questions, actually asking the question of how are we going to deal with this if an issue arises? If you do have to pop out, how are you going to communicate that to the rest of us there? So that's sort of how it worked for me. And I have no intentions of having a physical office location. We are spread out all over Queensland now, and it just works. And I think too, as a business owner, it gives me access to better talent because I'm not limited by location.
Yeah, great point. And I have to have this follow-up one, and Michelle, I'm coming your way in just a second. But could you do this without the tech that we have now? I mean, we've had it for quite some time. I guess we're using it more. Could you successfully do what you've just described if you didn't have the technology available to support that?
I think you could. I mean, you could go back to the age-old telephone, but I think it would be a bit more clunky and probably take longer throughout the day, whereas nowadays we're all pretty quick typists, so the ability to drop a question in a chat box is a lot easier. But I think you could, but yeah, obviously tech has enabled it a lot more.
Yeah, absolutely. So Michelle, I have to ask you this question. You worked initially as a consultant at VLA, and now obviously you're remote special counsel. So I'm emphasising the word remote there. How have you found flexible working? And I guess, was that a factor in what, and you've mentioned this already, but was it a big factor in what drew you to VLA as basically its operation model?
I think, well, initially I have to point out, I've worked in a home office as early as 2015 when I was a consultant firm then. And so it wasn't at all unusual to me to work from a home office and be flexible in that way when everything happened in 2020. Let's just put it out there. That was really 2020 that threw every one of us into that world. And I started working from home holistically again in 2020, but I'd moved away from full-time practice in the city due to health issues, and also to commence my PhD. And so I then, due to some health issues I had, I kind of created my own firm out of a product of circumstance more than anything. And for that flexible approach to income producing, let's be honest, that's really a matter of that, plus also just wanting to keep my skills current, really.
Sure.
And stretch those brain muscles that I've been working so many years for. And so when Sarah and I commenced working together as I was a consultant to VLA, and it was a really wonderful opportunity really to kind of do a try before you buy, although I didn't know I wanted to buy at that point. I was just enjoying the work that we did, and we found that we worked really well together. We had very similar approaches to business and to client management and all those sorts of things, so it just worked. It was really just an organic, great, working experience. And then I don't know, Sarah must have had a sixth sense and asked me one day if I'd be interested in working more permanently with VLA. And she didn't know that I was considering what to do with my firm, because I really just ended up just mostly doing my work with consultancy through VLA. And it was great work. It worked really well because we communicated nice and openly and regularly. And it just, you do have to work, not that you do it consciously all the time, but you do have to work to maintain communication and relationships in a workplace when you are in different locations. And to be honest, if I had to be in Brisbane for working at VLA, I wouldn't be with VLA. Circumstances in my life and what I need to function every day is level of flexibility. I've got 2 kids at school. As I said, I've got multiple facets of my career, and all of that makes me who I am. So, and, with my health, doctor's appointments and all sorts of things, and physio and all that sort of jazz, and all of that is necessary for me. So the remote aspect, one, it's not new to me, so I was quite comfortable with that in the first place. I'd also seen it for years, so I knew the kinds of pain points that could arise in a remote experience. So I kind of knew that going in, and I think Sarah and I, having had that remote experience, even as a consultant to VLA when we were able to work out any of those kinks before I came on board permanently. And to be honest, I don't even recall there being any kinks really. We were pretty, regular in our communication, email, chat, all those sorts of things. And a regular Zoom every now and then as well. So definitely the technology helps us to achieve that. But I think that's one thing that people do need to put some brain power to, is the need to maintain that relationship and that regular communication between team members. It's easy to do that in the physical environment. You're passing a door and you say g'day, you might go and grab a coffee together, you might have a chat, whatever, but you do need to make an effort when you're not in that physical environment together. And for people that are committed to that, it's an easy enough process to have.
Michelle, how does that work in a hybrid environment? And I'll come to you, Sarah, maybe with this question as well. And let me kind of explain that by giving you an example that I've kind of heard, which is, if you've got some folks in the office and you will kind of stick your head outside the door, or you will do a walk around, you'll have a conversation, and there's almost a concern that person may end up with more work than another person in the team who's at home, who you haven't had that Zoom call or that connection with. And so it's not even intentional. It's just that someone is right in front of you and the other person isn't. How do you counter that from from your point of view, Michelle? And then Sarah, I want to ask you, how do you counter that from a business owner's point of view as well? Because I think it's a real thing if you're in a hybrid work environment.
Yeah, I think that's a really big concern that I have for those working in a truly hybrid model, that the people that are remote are going to be left behind in opportunities and work and experience, and to their detriment, but also to the business's detriment, because there's great talent that's not being accessed, and the client's detriment at the forefront of all of that. I think, honestly, the responsibility rests with the leaders of those teams to ensure that there is a collegiate approach to managing that team, both in the physical sense in the remote sense. Because, and that's what I mean about putting the effort into open communication and the like. And I know that some people prefer the physical existence, and I get that. But I think in this current environment, we can't ignore that the hybrid approach to business is here, and it's here to stay.
Yeah.
And I think we just need to evolve. Otherwise our clients are going to be the ones that pay the price, because the talent that they have hired and putting all this money and effort into, they're not getting the opportunity to really give what they have to give. And a lot of us, I mean, I'm an introvert, as you know, Terry. I'm an introvert, and so I love my solitude, and I work really effectively in my solitude and in an environment I can completely control. And for that works really well, and therefore I'm much more productive in a different kind of environment that's not sort of suited to me. So you'll find people of all shapes and sizes and different types of attitudes that may very well thrive in the home office environment, to the greatest benefit of the firm and indeed the client. So I think it really is a matter for leaders to take stock of what the situation is now and make the adjustments they need to, even in their own mindset, to really bring the team together and take extra steps to bring the remote team in to say, hey, you are just as important to this firm as the people sitting behind me or in the next room.
Absolutely. And I guess all of these things are playing out in our clients' organisations as well, that they're dealing with. Michelle, you'll love my new T-shirt. It says introvert but willing to talk about cats.
Oh,
so
I love it.
I'm just mentioning that to you kind of right up front. So Sarah, let me flip it to you as the leader. Has it changed, I don't know, the metrics by which you measure things like productivity? Do you measure things like productivity? You know, how has it changed what you do as a business owner?
So to be honest, I agree with Michelle that for the firms that are hybrid, it does come down to the leaders to really make sure they're including everyone, and also kind of going so far as to do a personality assessment on the team to work out who are the introverts, who are the extroverts, how do people like to work. For our firm, it's actually not something that I consciously think about, because we are all remote. So there's not one person being overlooked over someone else who's in front of me. But I am very mindful, particularly for our lawyer, and she won't mind me saying this, that when she joined, one of her concerns was that how would she get the support from me and not feel like she was isolated and unable to ask the question. And I basically said to her, well, how do you want to access the support? Like, how do you want to email? Do you want to phone? And part of that is for me, and I do like to do this, is understanding how people learn, because it's come about that she likes to learn via writing. So she is much better if I give instructions in an email so she can absorb that than if I prattle it off over a voice message or on the phone. So I think it's about actually speaking to your team about who they are and how they like to work, in order to ascertain how you go about building that kind of communication channels. I think too that we are very good at having the banter without getting distracted from our work. So we have a team chat. We also have a weekly Zoom meeting. So that gives an opportunity for people to talk about anything, that's going on. And, our lawyer does have a cat that's always up to antics. So we get those updates, and so does Michelle. Or there might be other things going on. I've got chickens, so sometimes we're talking about them. So we do have that banter. In terms of productivity, for me, it's gut feel, and I know that's not particularly helpful. It's not something that I measure, but I know whether there's work being done or not. And look, I'm not bothered at all if someone's off putting their washing on, because I know the task that they've got to do, and I'm very clear, particularly with our secretary and our lawyer who work directly with me, whereas Michelle and I work a little bit separately in terms of time frames. So I'm clear about the realistic time frame for a task. And that's those timeframes are met. But if there's an instance where it's not being met and that hasn't happened, then I'd be asking the question of, was the time frame too short? Did I, totally underestimate how long that was going to take? or is there something else going on? And that isn't from there's something else going on isn't from me getting angry. It's more, is there something actually going on that I need to know about, that, you would pick up on in a physical environment if someone's not themselves, just by their body language and demeanor. So that's really what I do in terms of productivity, is just I know what's getting done from what's being sent, and I'm copied into emails and that sort of thing, so I can see the progress. We are also slowly but surely working on our task list and workflows so that we can see who's been allocated what and how those tasks are progressing.
But it sounds also like you've almost adopted an agile work practice as well, because you are now communicating very regularly to see who's up to what, not in a let me check in and make sure you're working way, but more of who's doing what today, right, we're good to go. And which is fabulous. I mean, that's it's almost like stealthy agile. You didn't know it happened, but in fact it's happening every day anyway.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that to me seems to be a really big plus as well.
Yeah, and look, like, that hasn't been a conscious decision, like you're saying. And I think too, I know that all of us have external things, whether that's kids or other interests or health issues or whatever it might be. So the check-in thing isn't a micromanaging thing by any means. It's more actually checking in. Is there anything, like, are the timeframes okay? Do you foresee any issues popping up? And then, so that I know if an issue does pop up and someone's not at work or they've had to leave fairly quickly, I know where things are at exactly at that point in time, so that we can put a plan in place to keep those things progressing.
Yeah, absolutely. So unfortunately, we're getting towards the end. So I did want to ask you both this question, and drawing on your experiences, I guess, certainly in VLA, but kind of more broadly as well. VLA, obviously a highly successful, and I guess what we'd increasingly refer to as a new law firm today. What are your words of wisdom? And Sarah, I'm going to come to you first on this one. What are your words of wisdom now? You're really close to 2 years on from when you started. For others that are listening today and they kind of want to emulate you, they want to practice law differently, what would you say to them, apart from probably go and do it? What would you say to them in terms of, what do they need to think about? What do they need to wrap their head around? What questions do they need to ask and answer for themselves as owners of a business, or potentially an owner of a business?
So I would absolutely say go and do it. But I think before you go and do it, there needs to actually be a little bit of inward soul searching, because I think you need to know yourself to know how you're going to run your business, because there is no point saying you're going to do something if that's actually not something that sits comfortably with you. So you ultimately need to set your business up to suit who you are and the life that you live. That's the first point that I would make. So do some soul searching. The second thing I would advise, or give as a tip, is to really challenge yourself as to whose benchmark you are actually setting yourself against. Because there's a lot of tradition in this industry, and there's a lot of people who will say, oh, you can't do that. But why not? Why not? We obviously are bound by responsibilities and obligations, and by all means have to comply with them. But really, in terms of setting up a law practice, which is fairly inexpensive to do, let's be honest, whose benchmark are you actually saying, oh, no, I can't do that? Because if it's someone else's expectations, that doesn't really matter. There's always going to be people that say, oh, you shouldn't do that. Don't listen to those people. Find the people that are going to give you honest feedback and maybe say, look, maybe don't do that or try something different. But ultimately, what's the worst that can happen? You have an idea, you implement it. It doesn't work, that's fine. Move on to the next thing. So long as you've got that, obviously, that legally compliant foundation, just give anything a go. And if you think you want to give it a go, then do it, and don't worry about what other people say, because there's always going to be others with an opinion. But I do believe the industry is shifting, and I think that's great.
Yeah, absolutely. Words that warm my heart. Obviously, we live in the world of experimentation, so we love that. But as you say, within the parameters that you need to work, it's definitely doable. Michelle, what about you? What are your parting words of wisdom on all of this?
No pressure, Terry. Thanks. Look, I think that my big lesson I think I have taught myself or found in myself, much like Sarah in terms of that internal reflection, is that everyone has their own version of success, and to find out what that actually is for you, and not to be afraid to change and evolve as you as an individual change and evolve. Nothing is meant to be stagnant. Test the boundaries, absolutely, but find out what makes you happy, because at the end of the day, we see a massive rate of burnout among lawyers. We see amazing talent leaving the profession in droves because it just doesn't work. And it's really quite sad. It really, really is sad. And I mean, there's also a lot of firms that are starting out on their own because they just can't find the fit of what they're looking for in flexibility and remote work and whatever it might be to suit them. And it might not be what they want, but it's the only way they know how to do it. And so I think it's just to keep an open mind, find your own version of success and work toward that, and know that the industry is changing slowly but surely, and to keep being optimistic and positive about that change, and to follow Centre of Legal Innovation's work, because it's amazing, just FYI.
Thank you.
Truly, you live and breathe experimentation in this industry, and I think it's really invaluable insight into what you can do as a lawyer, and if you are going to open your firm as your own law firm. So there's some wonderful things to really think about and to prompt that thought process. So my last phrase is just, find your own version of success.
Absolutely. And redefine it, with embrace the redefinition, I guess. Yeah.
Let it evolve with you as an individual. Absolutely. Yeah.
Absolutely. Folks, congratulations on VLA. What a delight to spend the time with you to hear about your firm. I'm tempted to apply for a job now, Sarah. So, be careful kind of what you wish for in terms of people that join you.
Anytime.
Thank you. But absolutely amazing. I know if folks are looking to have a chat with you, they'll find you in all sorts of places, certainly on social media, and of course your website, and we've mentioned that a few times as well. Again, really delighted that you can join us. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be able to chat with you, and I wish you much continued success, and that you also just continue to thrive. Thank you very much, Sarah and Michelle.
Thanks so much, Terry. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks, you.
Terry. Always a pleasure.
Thanks very much for joining us, folks, and we really look forward to welcoming you back to the next episode in ReinventED Legal Business, the case studies. Thanks again, folks, and bye for now.